Good morning. Thanks for joining me on my virtual field trip. My goal today is to show you that you don't really have to go very far to see some wildlife, to see native species doing their natural things. And even though you might be in the city, you can see I'm on the south side of Chicago. I'm going to walk around in this forest preserve and find some cool things. We'll find some birds, we'll maybe find some chipmunks and squirrels. We'll also check out to see what kind of native wildflowers we see. So enjoy the walk and let's go see what we see. So I just took a walk underneath the road. Now I'm over here in a part of the park that's not used as much. As I come to the top of this hill, I look around and I can see there's a number of different wildflowers that we'll be able to see. One thing that you might not think of a wildflower, here, come over here. These are just dandelions. We think of them as a weed, but really they provide a lot of natural food for animals that live in the environment. I was researching the other day, I realized that I can feed rockstar dandelion greens. Squirrels and chipmunks and mice, plus a couple of birds eat their seeds. So even though we don't want them in our yard, there's something that actually benefits the environment. We're going to walk down this path and just keep our eyes out and see what we find. One thing we have to keep in mind as we walk is that nature doesn't like people. And so we have to keep our voices down. The biggest part of going out and walking and seeing nature is observing. Look, listen, try not to disturb things. Looking over here, I can see a robin. I'm sure you guys have them in your yard. You see them eating worms and other bugs. If we watch this one, he'll probably tip his head down and listen. We can't see their ears. Their ears are internal, which means they're covered up by skin, but they can use their ears to listen for worms and other insects, other bugs moving through the dirt. I see we've got some wildflowers over here, so we'll walk over and take a look. They're closed up right now, but these are spring beauties. They're normally pink or white when they open up. I imagine because it's chilly out today that they've gotten closed. We don't think of plants as moving, but they are able to. They open when the sun is out, and then they close when it's not, or when it's not very warm. Let's see if I can open this one up. I don't want to pick any of these because pollinators like bees and butterflies use the pollen and the nectar. Can you see inside there? They're very pretty when they're opened up. They're pretty now too, just not as pretty as normal. Alright, so that's one thing we found. We're going to find some others. As I look this way, I can see that there's a low spot where water is collecting. I can tell because of these tall cattails that have been cut down, most of them. And so I'm going to walk over and see what I see. In a low spot like this, there might be tadpoles, there might be frogs and toads, definitely worms. Looking over here, if I can get way down in there, there's some insect larvae swimming around in this, I don't know, it's probably too big to call a puddle, but too little to call a pond. But you can see those larvae swimming there in the algae. Insects lay their eggs, and we talked about how there are there's two different types of insects. There are insects that go through complete and incomplete metamorphosis. I can't tell what kinds of larvae this is, and so I don't know what kind of bugs they are. But those bugs are providing food for bigger bugs, birds, and toads, frogs that may come along. Cool. So I see over here we've got some other flowers. Let's walk over and take a look. Okay, this is garlic mustard. I don't think that people can really eat it. That's just the name that it's given. You see it's got some flowers. All plants, most plants, let's say most plants use flowers as part of their reproductive cycle. Bees, butterflies, some small birds come and visit these flowers, and then they reproduce. They help the plant reproduce. It's co-evolution. After the bees and butterflies visit these flowers, they mix pollen from one flower to another, and that helps the plant make seeds. When I look up, I see some seed pods from a burdock plant. These pods are covered with spines, which helps the plant spread out. I'm going to take one of the spines off. I wouldn't normally mess with it, but because these are last year's plants, they're not going to bother me. You see, the spines help the seed stick to fabric. It would also stick to a deer's fur or any other animal that came past. And then if I were to take this and walk off into some other part and then that seed fall on the ground, I've helped that plant spread out and find new territory to grow, so it's not taking the same resources as the parent plant. Looking over here, I see we've got a clump of wild violet. You guys might have this growing in your yard. Again, if it's in your grass, we kind of think of it as a weed, but it's very pretty. And if you wanted to grow them, you could just dig them up from your yard, put them in a flower bed, and they would grow. If you do that though, if you decide that you're going to grow, ouch. If you decide that you're going to grow them, you need to make sure that you get down here. Let's see if I can clear this out of the way. You need to get way down here by the stem and dig around there so that you get enough of the root for the plant to grow. The plant needs its roots to soak up water and other minerals, and it's going to need that, especially if you transplant it. I've got my fingers on this thorny plant here. There's a thorn out in my finger right there. The thorns on this plant aren't so that animals can take its seeds to some other place, but actually to protect the plant from those animals eating it. This is a blackberry bramble. Later on in the summer, it'll grow some flowers and then berries. Deer and squirrels might come and eat those. The seeds are inside, and after the animal eats them and digests them, it'll pass the seeds out the other end, and that helps the blackberry spread out and not use the same resources. So this part of Chicago sits up on a hill, and thousands of years ago it was an island. The island went all the way from 87th Street way down to Blue Island, the town of Blue Island, and that's where the town of Blue Island got its name. We're about to walk down the edge of the hill, which would have been the edge of the island, which means thousands of years ago we would have been walking underwater then. All of this field, all the fields around us, drain down. Water always drains down. Back in the 1930s, as part of a work project, the Civilian Conservation Corps built aqueducts to funnel the water so that the surrounding land wouldn't be eroded. I'm standing in the aqueduct now. You can see they put limestone in, just kind of made a path for the water to follow. We're going to walk down that path and see what kinds of animals, see what kind of flowers and other plants we find as we walk downhill into what used to be underwater Lake Michigan. So let's go. You can see there's a lot of, I'm going to jump back in. There's a lot of moss growing in the aqueduct. Moss is a type of plant that doesn't have real roots. Moss is very short and grows right close to whatever might be damp. There's enough water that comes through here that the moss is able to grow, and sometimes even dandelions are able to steal some of the resources. But you can see we can peel the moss back. It doesn't have roots like most plants. They're very short. Moss doesn't have vascular tubes in it like trees and like flowers, and so the water has to go to the whole plant without the use of those vascular tubes, the straw-like structures that we learned about. So moss is always really small. Over here, I see we've got some more spring beauties. These have been up for a couple weeks, so they may be starting to die off. It takes a lot of energy for plants to make flowers, and so they don't do it for very long most of the time. Sitting right next to me, I have a couple of different saplings, two different small trees that are growing. We know that most likely only one of them will survive because they're taking up the same types of resources. Looking over here, and I see a problem in the forest preserve. This tree does not belong here. This is an Indian wood, or maybe it's a wayfaring tree, but they're native to Africa, Europe, and Asia. This plant has been knocked over or something, but the reason it's a problem is because it's using resources that our native Illinois plants need. It looks like it's just a plant, but actually it's a tree. If you can look at the stem, you see it's wood. This whole part back here is wood. Oh, check this out. Again, like I said, it's always important to look when you're walking through the woods. I found a nest. I don't know if there's anything in it. I'm going to be really gentle just in case there's anything. Nope. This nest looks like it's old because it's got plants growing up through it. The bottom looks a little bit ragged. You can see that it's made with plant fibers. This is probably a warbler or a vireo nest from last spring. I like how it's just kind of built. It hangs underneath. We don't think of animals as being pretty smart, but that bird is smart enough that the whole thing hangs underneath that branch. Cool. Always looking. Oh, check this out. I found a good one. This is a tree flower. We don't think of trees as having flowers, but in order for them to grow seeds, they need them. These little flowers all release pollen, which really set off my allergies. Good thing I took my medicine this morning. You can see the tree had some new leaf growth out at the end. This end probably was bit off by a squirrel making its nest. But most trees have flowers like this. They make a mess when they get on our car, but they're essential to the trees for reproduction. Let's keep on walking. Here I see another tree with some tree flowers. These are pretty. They're red, probably to attract pollinators, but they're very pretty. Here I see a hornbeam tree. You can see it's got some nasty looking thorns on it right here. These thorns are to keep animals off of that tree. This plant doesn't want the animals eating its tree flowers, doesn't want it eating its seeds, and so it grew specialized stems that are really sharp. That would really hurt if you ran into it. I'm glad that I saw it from a distance and didn't crash like I normally do. Over here I see we've got some sort of a fungus, a mushroom or a toadstool or something, I'm not sure. But toadstools, mushrooms, funguses like this are all decomposers. You see it's growing on this log, which is obviously dead, and it's breaking the nutrients down, breaking that plant down, and turning it back into nutrients that other organisms can use. I'm going to move down this way because I see some shelf fungus growing on the same plant. The shelf fungus is called that because it's nice and flat. If you look in, you can see there's a bunch of different ones growing on that branch. And even though it's not a fungus isn't a plant or an animal, it's still an organism and it's still part of the environment. Everything works together. At home, Mom might grow some lilies, maybe Grandma grows lilies, but some lilies actually live in Illinois. This is a native lily. I can tell because of the shape of its flowers, because of the thickness of the shape of the leaves, not flowers, the thickness of the stem. And then we see this one is starting to blossom. And then there's more kind of over here. You can look around and they're growing spread out through here. Here we've got some more shelf fungus growing on a stump. That stump's been dead for a long time, I can tell because it's pretty rotten. But those shelf funguses are just breaking it apart, returning it to nature. It's like nature's own version of recycling. So because it rained a couple of days, remember before at the top of the hill I was talking about the aqueducts being built to flow this water. This water is coming from, it's draining from all the hills around. And if this wasn't here, it would be moving dirt, it would be moving minerals and eroding away the side of the hill. They wanted to protect this hill, protect the land around it, and so they built the aqueducts to funnel that water and keep the hills in their earlier, I guess it would still be natural, but to keep them in their earlier condition so that people could enjoy them. As I was walking down the path, I saw on the other side of the aqueduct a whole clump of flowers. So I had to walk over here and be careful. And if you look, geez, there's a lot of plants here. In here are a whole nest of lilies. Not a nest, a whole clump. I don't know what word you want to use. These are lilies. Like, again, you might have, I don't know, they look like Easter lilies, kind of. I can open them up. The tips of them are brown, which means they were probably opened a couple days ago. Yeah, they're falling apart now. I don't know if you can see. There's some of the interior of the plant, the stamen and the pistil. I bet these were really pretty 3 days ago when they were open. Too bad they're not open today. But you can see there's a whole clump that they've colonized. Now if I can get back without killing myself, I'll be okay. There's a blue jay off in the distance making noise. Hopefully we'll get close enough we can see one of those. I hear a robin right now. The edge of the aqueduct is really pretty. There's lots of moss and then some plants that are growing out of cracks in there. It's really funny to think that even though we're close to the city, it's very quiet out here. We're just going to keep walking, keep seeing what we see. Not sure what this plant is, but you can see there are a lot of holes here in the trunk. That tells me that a woodpecker's been here and that this is probably some sort of a honeysuckle, and insects get inside there because of how sweet the sap is. And the woodpeckers have been pecking at it to get to some of those insects. Again, if I wasn't looking, if I wasn't paying attention, I wouldn't have seen that. also a cardinal singing over that way somewhere. If I see him, I'll make sure we show you. Usually in birds, it's only the male who really sings like that. Looking over here, I see another wildflower. These are trillium. You can see they have bright red, actually I guess it's more of a dark red, almost purple flower. And then it's surrounded by 3 leaves. There's a whole clump of them here. They bloom in the early spring. Just another wildflower. Here's one that hasn't quite bloomed yet. If you look inside, you can see that dark red, dark purple flower that's getting ready to open up. In another day or two, that's going to open up and it'll look like these other ones up here. Well, I was hoping we'd see some of those. Here we have a wild geranium growing. These are related to the geraniums that Mom might be growing out in pots or in flower beds. But these are native to Illinois and they just grow wild. It's a big clump. Those are really, really pretty.
How did these plants get here?
Well, most of them have just evolved to live in this environment. They developed here. So here's the female cardinal. She's light gray, whereas the male is a bright red. The females are usually darker so that you can't see them. It's natural camouflage. There's a lot of trees in this section of the forest preserve that have these red tags on them. This is honeysuckle and it doesn't belong here in Illinois. So the forest preserve, the volunteers for the forest preserve are going to come through and they'll dig those out, they'll cut them off because they're actually harming the rest of the environment. They poison the soil around them so that other things don't grow. Definitely something that needs to come out. I saw another nest, so I'm going to walk over and see what's inside of it. There's a lot of blackberry with those little thorns. I don't necessarily like getting jabbed. I'm going to try to move it and be very careful checking out this nest. I'm going to take some blackberry with me now. I hope you guys appreciate what I'm going through for you. There's an egg in the nest. So I'm not going to disturb it too much, but I will get the camera so that I can show you. So here's our nest. We're going to walk in and see what's inside of it. I'm going to be really careful and try not to damage anything. Oh look, there's an egg. Looking at it, it's brown and white, speckled. It might be a cardinal nest, or it might be a cowbird egg in somebody else's nest. Here we go. Finally we can see something that we're not going to necessarily terrify. At the bottom of the fence, that bird is a brown thrasher. He's a little bit bigger than a robin, and he's got almost a little hook to his beak. He goes through and he digs up worms, he digs up insect larvae. He makes a mess going through the leaves, picking up insects. They're pretty cool. They have a bright yellow eye, which I think is really neat because a lot of birds, their eyes are dark, whereas his are really bright and yellow. glad we got to see something. So here we have some May apples. They're called May apples because they normally bloom in May, and their flower looks like the flower on an apple tree. You can't eat them, but they're pretty. It looks like a small tropical rainforest. And if we look underneath, you know, that would be a great habitat for creatures to hang out in and hide from predators. Alright, here we have a squirrel. Just disappeared inside its nest. This is about the time of year when young squirrels start coming out of their nest and scampering up and down the trees. Alright, there's a chipmunk back in there, gathering some nuts and seeds. Oh, now I've lost him. I'll never find him again. I keep talking about how important it is to listen while you're out. As I'm walking, when I actually shut my mouth, I can hear the water flowing down the aqueduct. This is a very pretty area. I'm glad that you guys are with me today as we're walking around. I've stood here quietly for about 5 minutes, and now this little guy has finally come back out where I can see him. This is an eastern chipmunk. There's another one nearby making noise. He doesn't like me standing here. A chipmunk is a kind of ground squirrel. It's in the squirrel family, but there's ground squirrels and tree squirrels, and well, you can tell what kind he is. They make their burrow underground, unlike that gray squirrel that we saw a few minutes ago that disappeared inside her nest in the tree. So there's our chipmunk just sitting. It's really interesting because while I had the camera off, there were 2 different groups of people who went past, and one of them had their dog. And I really figured our chipmunk would have taken off. But he's just sitting there, watching me as I watch him. Alright, here's a clump of Virginia bluebells. Bet you can figure out why they've got that name. Just another wildflower. But something that you might not see if you're not taking the time to pay attention. There's a chipmunk right up here watching me. He looks fake. Oops, sorry. You know, again, if you just walk through and you're making a lot of noise, you're not going to notice any of these things. So you have to be quiet and observant. Oh, he's eating now, we're watching. Chipmunks are so cute, I could watch them all day, but I'm probably boring you guys to pieces. I'm going to be really careful as I try to get over here and show you guys something. So this is part of the harm that people do without thinking. This plant, this purple, is a lesser periwinkle or myrtle. And it's covering this hill. This plant's originally from Turkey, which is like at the boundary between Asia and Europe. Off to the right, over to the left, I guess, is another invasive species, some English ivy. You can see both of those plants have completely overgrown the edge of this hill, which erects the environment for more native species. So we have to be careful what we plant and what we do with it, because plants, like any other organisms, want to grow and reproduce. And these have kind of gotten out of control. So I walked up one of the hills next to the aqueduct and just looking around. You know, there's a lot of deadfall, which as you walk you might kind of ignore because it's, you know, a dead plant. It's a stick. You can break it, you can do whatever, but like we've seen with the shelf fungus, even dead things have a purpose in the environment. They provide resources back into the ground so that other things can grow. Up here we can see the catbird. It's a gray catbird. He's looking through the leaves, looking for something to eat. There's another robin up there. Alright, here's a woodpecker. From this distance and because of the light, I can't really tell what he is. But you can see he's looking for some insects inside there. Maybe he's a red-bellied woodpecker? I can't tell. And I can't stay still either. More trillium that I found. They only have one flower per plant. If we look down inside, we can see, you know, the stamen and the pistil. That's where the pollinators need to get to. Cool. Behind me you see I've got a street, which means I'm at the bottom of the hill, pretty much done with my walk. Thanks for joining me today. As I walk back up the hill, if I see anything, I'm going to add more to this video. But for the most part, this is probably it. Thanks a lot. There's a warbler. Pecking around looking for food. Whoop, there he goes. Alright, so I'm back at our nest that had the egg in it. And you can see there's the female cardinal sitting on top, trying to keep her egg warm. Again, she's dull colored so that predators don't see her, but I saw the nest and knew where to look. I'm glad that we get to see her sitting there.